This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, I'm the Blood Guy. Welcome back to another review of a documentary based on a serial killer. And since my last video was Netflix's Conversations with the Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, I figured I would just continue in that direction. But I guess work backwards because that is the third installment, so now I'm going to do the second installment, the John Wayne Gacy tapes, which this came out actually the same year. I thought these were coming out once every year, but this came out last year, the same as Dahmer. Came out April 20th, 2022, and I had seen this before. I saw it when it first dropped on Netflix in April of last year, but I did just rewatch it for this review. And overall, I have to say I might have liked this more than the Dahmer tapes. Back when I first saw it, I thought it was more informative and more enlightening than it was the first time I saw the Dahmer tapes. But I'll get into that. So, of course, it's directed by Joe Berlinger, who has directed all three of these Conversations with the Killer installments. He directed the Paradise Lost trilogy of true crime documentaries in the 90s. He directed the Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie. And of course, since this is Netflix, we're probably never going to see a DVD of this, which is very unfortunate because this probably is my favorite John Wayne Gacy documentary. Actually, all of the Conversations episodes, or seasons, whatever you want to call them, has been my favorite for each killer that they've done. Now, there was a DVD made of the Ted Bundy tapes, which I do own, which I'm at least glad for that because this is still my favorite of the three. This is my favorite Ted Bundy documentary. I will be getting to this next. But, so, going into this, I thought, well, because I didn't really remember how informative I thought it was when I first watched it. But as I was watching the Dahmer tapes this last time, I thought to myself, well, it's really not that informative. It's not the film's fault. It's because I've read so much, seen so much, and listened to so much on Dahmer. And I figured that was going to be the case with Gacy. But there was still a lot that I picked up on even this second time around. Even though there has been just as much on Gacy as there has been Dahmer. Maybe it just feels like there hasn't been that Gacy fatigue or oversaturation that we've kind of had with Dahmer in the last few years. Maybe that has something to do with it. Because for a while, other than all the books, like the 30 encyclopedias that I have on serial killers, some of the more specific ones, he's probably on the cover of most serial killer books. He's one of the most notorious, at least of the 70s, in America in general, but certainly of the 70s. He's in just about every serial killer book or documentary that you can come across. But for the longest time, the only book I actually had on him was Terry Sullivan's Killer Clown, which Terry Sullivan, who was the he worked for the Cook County Prosecutor Office. He has a big role in this documentary as well. So this is a great book. And then these all just came in, actually. You got Buried Dreams, Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer by Tim Cahill. Got Inside the Mind of John Wayne Gacy by Brad Hunter. Very much like the Dahmer one that I have of this. And there is a documentary of this by John Borowski. Can't buy it on DVD, only streaming. But this book came in today. And the book isn't the whole cover because this is supposed to go into the ground, reveal the clown face. But, this is just a bunch of court documents, articles, handwritten stuff from Gacy. And I am waiting on Defending a Monster, which is written by his attorney, Sam Amarante, who also has a big role in this documentary as well. But other than that, which I did see this documentary for the first time before I saw something like To Catch a Killer with Brian Dennehy, which this almost has the same structure as this documentary, starting out with the disappearance of Robert Peast from the Nissan's pharmacy, leading into the investigation, then the capture. Very much the same. It gets a lot right. This is probably the most accurate Gacy film. Then there's the one from 2003, which really isn't all that great. I had seen this one way before, but I did not see this until after I saw this documentary for the first time. So there was a lot to learn. Now, one thing I really like about this one is maybe I didn't really notice it at first with the Dahmer tapes because Dahmer is so forthcoming and nonchalant about how he explains things. But with these conversation tapes, you really do get the voice of the killer. And I don't just mean the sound, but like their personality. Especially with Gacy. Gacy has the most personality out of all three of them. Bundy, Gacy, Dahmer. I mean, one of the first audios we get is when he's talking about Lieutenant Joe Kosinzak. And he's just saying like, that Joe Kosinzak, that asshole from the Cook County Sheriff Office, that guy kept telling me, just, you definitely get that sort of macho, kiss my ass, don't mess with me guy that he, projected out to the world. That is full swing in these tapes. You really get to see the shift where he goes from trying to depict himself as a victim, as I don't know anything about these murders, I'm totally innocent, to why should I feel guilty for something that I know nothing about, to essentially going all the way to I have no remorse. Their bodies were mine. I bought them. I can do what I want with them. You really get to see just the shift. And I don't know if this is just how he spoke that day. I noticed it happened with the Bundy tapes as well, or if they slowed the tape down, so it gives it this like, I have no remorse for any of them. It just kind of creepy. I will say this one is probably more hard hitting than Dahmer. You get more interviews from some of the family members, like one of his victims, Michael Bonin, his sister, is in this. Wendy, I have her full name in my notes, but she was a friend of Robert Peast. She's interviewed. You get a lot of archive interviews, like mothers and fathers of his victims, hearing them get to speak. There is a gay rights activist talking about sort of the gay community and life in Chicago at that time. That was very enlightening. Which actually, one thing I never thought of, and it's not even mentioned in things like the Dahmer tapes, was I always thought, teen runaways as teen runaways. She goes on to explain, well, there's runaways, but they're really throwaways. Their families threw them away when they came out or got figured out. So, okay, that. I really did get a whole new perspective on just sort of the world that Gacy was hunting in by watching this. And, of course, I would even say the way it's edited, like, the first episode when they're talking about surveillance and tailing Gacy for days, like 10 days, before he finally confessed to his lawyer, and when they finally pulled him over for some marijuana, which he shoved in a kid's pocket, then went on a chase. The way it's edited with the interviews of all the people in law enforcement, it's kind of high-speed energy. Like, the way the interviews are given are just as intense as, like, a scene with a high-speed chase in a movie. So, the editing by, I think it's Cy Christensen? Yeah. Cy Christensen, who I believe did the editing on all three. I know Justin Mayland, who did the score for all three. So it's edited very, very well, just like the other three. The other two, excuse me. The look of the interviews all look great. One thing it does do that's kind of repetitive that I thought was kind of a little hokey was whenever an interviewee is about to say something or share something that's kind of intense, you'll get the voice of them speaking, but you'll get this image before it just cuts to them speaking, where they're just kind of, and then the camera just kind of pulls in. But you do get some really intense stories. Like with the Dahmer tapes, some of my favorite interviews were like of Vernell Bass, who was Pamela Bass's husband, a neighbor of Dahmer. The people that knew him personally. To me, the best interviews were people like this one guy, I think it was Stephen Namer. I have his name in my notes. A guy that Gacy kind of psychologically tortured and almost sexually abused in Waterloo in 1967, before his sodomy charge. Other people sharing that how they escaped Gacy, or when they were behind closed doors with him. And even if he didn't do anything to him, just how off he was, how terrified they were. I thought those were some of the more interesting interviews that you don't always get. You almost always get like the law enforcement side, which even this I did think was more insightful, more illuminating than a lot of, say, documentaries like this. There are a few survivors in here. They share their story. You also get a lot of intense footage of like the actual excavation of the crawl space, like how they tore all the floors out, and it's kind of blurry, but you can still make it out, like looking down through the floor and just seeing the holes they dug with these skeletal bodies in them. Stories of how some of them they just had to grab by the ribs and just pull out because the ground was so frozen. Get stories by some of his former PDM employees about how they had to dig holes for Gacy. He would have them either not necessarily dig their own holes, but dig holes for him. Like this one guy who dug a barbecue pit for him, and he thought it was a little too deep, but then the next day he came back, it was all filled with concrete. Come to find out, his friend was buried there. So the people directly involved with Gacy were some of the most interesting interviews. But also, I also really like the portions where it just talks about him in the community. He was always the guy. A lot of this I did know. Like, he was the guy who, after a snowstorm, you'd look out the window, he's shoveling your driveway. You always had an invitation to his cookouts, his barbecues. You had a lot of footage and photos from his themed barbecues of the summers. And he described them as lavish, but they were basically backyard barbecues. And you really get the idea that this guy was kind of like BTK. He was a pillar of his community. I will say this one doesn't jump around as much as, say, the Dahmer tapes. It does after a while, like especially episodes 2 and 3. Episode 1, it feels more focused because you're really just following this investigation on Gacy, tailing him, trying to find this evidence, looking into his past, between December 11th, 78, and December 20th. Oddly enough, December 11th is my brother's birthday, December 20th is my birthday. And so really just them investigating him, trailing him, trying to find something. But then one of them comes across his sodomy charge in Waterloo, Iowa. So we jump back in time a couple times, but it's really just about how he got his life in Waterloo, how he got convicted, his time served, and then when he got out, he moved to Illinois. So it definitely feels more focused than say the Dahmer tapes. But you also get a lot of footage of him in the Waterloo area, like when he was serving in Anamosa between 68 and 70, being in the prison choir, being the first cook in the prison uh, kitchen. Wow. But it goes into everything about his past. His first marriage to Marlene, his kids, Michael and Christine, how he never saw them again after 1968, moving to Chicago, meeting Carol Hoff, marrying her in I think 74, and then of course getting into his sexuality, which I really liked the audio tapes about his sexuality because getting his perspective on it was very interesting. He goes into the difference between homosexuality, bisexuality, and heterosexuality from his point of view. And I guess it wasn't out of the ordinary to think that way at that time. Because that's another thing, like with the Dahmer tapes, most of that took place in the early 90s, which was kind of the second phase of the AIDS epidemic. Like the 80s was the diagnoses of AIDS. Early 90s is when a lot of people were dying of AIDS. This is pre-AIDS. This is all 70s. And it does go into how, a lot of people blame the cops. I would say the cops in this one were not as homophobic and careless as in the Dahmer case. But it does go into how it's not entirely the cops' fault because there was a huge stigma around being gay at that time, or maybe even more so that time than the years to come. So much so that when someone's kid went missing, especially once it came out, Gacy's this killer. Are any of these your sons? A lot of families were like, well, he's known as a gay sex killer. If we come out saying that's our son, he's going to be known as gay. So, no, let's just leave it. And unfortunately, that did happen a lot. And that's probably why, as of 2021, there's still 5 unidentified bodies, 5 unidentified victims. I will say this one had a bit more of a emotional ending, and it did do something very nice, I thought, because it didn't just have all the victims in memory of. It actually gave the website for cookcountysheriff.com and was actually saying, hey, if you know anything about these 5 remaining victims, please contact us because we're trying to, we have the DNA testing now. And it does go into how in 2010, 17, and 21, 3 more bodies have been ID'd. And it goes really deep into his, his trial, his, him trying to get the insanity plea. We actually get interview from a guy that sort of the jury foreman, how his trial was like 4 weeks, but they deliberated for less than 2 hours. Of course, it goes into his execution. It goes into everything in his life, but it's very detailed. It doesn't go into all 33 of his victims. Of course not. That's a lot, especially since at the time this was being made, I think 6 were unidentified. Because the one in 2021, it's not part of the documentary. It's a picture in text at the very end, so I think that happened after filming. But it goes into certain ones. But again, a lot of the graphics that are used, I really enjoyed. That I noticed from the Dahmer tapes, where it kind of looks like I think it's called like a panorama shot, where it's a photo, but it's like a whole room. how it kind of pans. Everything looks 3D, like you're actually there, but it's just a 2D picture. And they kind of put like this dust flying, so it looks like you're actually there. But like a whole tour of his house, and then down to the crawl space. Uh, this is the ultimate John Wayne Gacy documentary that I've seen so far. I know there's a 5-hour one. I believe it's 5 hours on Peacock called uh, Devil in Devil in Disguise, which I think there's actually a series called that, but I know the Gacy one is probably 5 hours. But from what I've seen so far, I do think this is the best one. I mean, it starts off with the disappearance of Robert Peast, goes into the investigation, how they get their eyes on Gacy, start tracking him, following him, the 2 search warrants, how on the second warrant, well, because they go into how they smell rotting corpses, rotting flesh, and that's how they wanted to get the second search warrant. He was already picked up for marijuana at that time, so then when they went down to the crawl space, that's when all hell broke loose. And I will say, the usage of the audio, the usage of the audio and going back in time for certain things feels more seamless. It feels more fluid in this one than it did the Dahmer tapes. I actually think you get more audio from Gacy in this one than we did Dahmer in his. It still doesn't feel like a conversation piece. It's still just a few sentences here and there to kind of punctuate a point or give context from his side to a certain topic. It's still used sporadically. It never feels like an interview or a conversation. But I do think you get more Gacy in this one than you did Dahmer. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very, very well made. I would say I do prefer this one over Dahmer, but I don't like it as much as the Ted Bundy tapes. I'd still say this one's my favorite. Oh, and then just one last thing I have is just this card in this resin skull, which I believe the skull is made either made out of something unrelated. I thought it was made from the rubble of his original house, but the dirt is actually from his property. You can get this at the crime museum in Chicago, which is where I got this. So I was going to save that for the collection video, but it pertains to this topic. So really enjoyed this documentary. Another reason why Conversations with the Killer is my favorite serial killer documentary series. Can't wait to see what the next one is. But after this, I will be reviewing Bundy, which that one actually has 4 episodes instead of 3. But so with that, I guess we'll get into the summary, and then I tried to take less notes than I did with Dahmer. It didn't work out that way, so forgive me for that. But so yeah, get into the summary and then the list of topics that this covers. So as always, I like to give a brief summary on the killer that the film was based on. So John Wayne Gacy is one of America's most prolific and notorious serial killers ever. He killed 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978, burying 26 of them in the crawl space of his home and 3 more under various areas of his property on 8213 North Somerdale Avenue in Des Plaines, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. He dumped the last 4 in the Des Plaines River. Most of his murders started after 1976, after the divorce of his second wife, Carol, which was due to his increasing attention towards young men and coldness towards her. Gacy would cruise around the Chicago area and pick up runaways, male prostitutes, or impersonate an officer and feign an arrest, take them back to his house where he would subdue them either with chloroform or with his, quote, handcuff trick. Once they had the cuffs on, they were at his mercy. He would also use his, quote, rope trick, which was just a double slip knot with a stick to create a tourniquet, or use his makeshift pillory and sexually torture them while they were in that. A number of his victims were also employed by him in his contracting business, PDM. Uh, Before his killings, he served 18 months in Anamosa Penitentiary for a sodomy charge on a 15-year-old boy in 1968, while living in Waterloo, Iowa. Afterwards, he moved to Illinois. Like BTK, John Wayne Gacy was a respected pillar of his community, both in Waterloo and the Chicago area. In Waterloo, he ran 3 KFCs for his father-in-law of his first marriage, was a prominent member of the Iowa JCs, which is a youth group, and getting involved in politics. In Illinois, he was involved in Democratic politics, even having his photo taken with then First Lady Rosalind Carter, hosted themed block parties and barbecues, and was known to be the guy to shovel your driveway without asking. Everyone respected John Wayne Gacy. As a child, he was known to be a short, chubby kid who'd rather spend time with his mother and sisters than play sports, and he suffered from health issues. This bothered his cruel, alcoholic father, John Sr., who would abuse and berate him. This abuse followed Gacy for the rest of his life. He was finally caught when people saw him with his final victim, Robert Peast, on December 11, 1978. An investigation began, and at one point officers were invited in, and they could smell the rotting, decomposing bodies. After a second search warrant was issued, they found the bodies in the crawl space. One of the biggest elements of the Gacy story is that of the, quote, killer clown. While Gacy was the professional clown Pogo, and sometimes Patches, he did this at children's parties, hospitals, nursing homes, and for his political friends. He never donned a clown costume while hunting for or luring his victims. There's never been any evidence that he dressed up as a clown while killing his victims. It's just an aspect that has become just as big as the story itself. He was convicted and sentenced to death in March of 1980 and executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994, with a crowd of cheering onlookers outside. While in prison, he took up painting. There have been countless books, documentaries, and movies on Gacy, and his original paintings has become some of the most sought-after, quote, murderabilia. And so now we get into the film itself, and sorry, that was longer than it was supposed to be. Started losing my voice already on that one. And yeah, one thing I mentioned to say in that first part of the video that I was really thankful for is that this really does clear up the whole, killer clown aspect of John Wayne Gacy. Like, no, he didn't dress up as a clown and then stalk Chicago and pick up young kids. Even this, I don't think is entirely true. Often said to be the inspiration for Stephen King's evil Pennywise in It. I did read that King liked the idea of a killer clown going after kids, but I think just the look or the idea is all that came from Gacy. But yeah, I mean, it's possible that maybe after he had them in the handcuffs or he was torturing them, maybe he put on the grease paint or the clown suit. But yeah, no, he didn't go out and hunt and lurk and lure dressed up as a clown. So no. So we get into the documentary itself, and episode 1 is called Life of the Party, which opens up with Dr. Kim Byers-Lund, who was the friend of Robert Peast, who worked with him at Nissan's pharmacy on the day that he went missing, which was December 11th, 78, with footage of the pharmacy and Chicago in the winter of 78, photos and videos of Peast. She goes into the kind of person that Peast was. And then we get the thing on screen that says, while awaiting trial for murder, John Wayne Gacy was interviewed from November 79 to April 1980 by a member of his defense team that wishes to remain anonymous. There's 60 hours worth of interviews, never been released publicly till now. And so then it really opens up with the Chicago, Illinois, 1978. We're introduced to Sam Amirante, who was Gacy's lawyer. which I love photos of him back from the 70s because he looks like a mob guy that like Joe Pesci would play. But he goes into how Gacy became his first client in his private practice, and sort of Gacy's role in the community with a ton of photos. And it's structured by day numbers, like Robert Peace investigation day 1, Gacy's home excavation day 1, and then Gacy trial day 1, as many as there were. So with episode 1, it's the Robert Peace investigation. So investigation day 1, which was the 12th, it goes into the missing person report, photos, Michael Albrecht and a few other Des Plaines PD are interviewed. Goes more into Peace, how Gacy was tied in. Audio from Gacy about his first involvement in the Peace case. Yeah, goes into how Peace was to talk to this guy about a contracting job. How, I'm going to try to be vague for people that haven't seen it. It's a fault of mine. Day 2, the 13th, audio of Gacy, his initial interview for questioning. They were introduced to Terry Sullivan, who wrote this, who is Cook County prosecutor on giving the first search warrant. The search warrant and the search, which didn't show anything. They went to the house on 8213 North Summerdale Avenue, and how they found some stuff, but it wasn't anything incriminating. Even some homoerotic books, hemophilic books, a very large dildo with some handcuffs and whips. There was a class ring and a TV, but they couldn't link it to anything. Nothing about Robert Peace. But there's photos of his entire house and some of the stuff that they found. But then they mentioned that they look into his past and realize that he had a sodomy charge in Iowa. So then we jump back to Waterloo, Iowa, 1966. Photos from that period. Talks about him in the JCs, which was really his first taste of power over people, especially kind of more so political power as well. Audio about his first marriage to Marlene in 1964 and his 2 kids, Michael and Christine, goes into his 3 KFCs that he ran. Steve Nevers, that's the guy. He gets a long, uninterrupted story about how he was this youth that was involved with the JCs, how he was brought back to Gacy's house, left to stay the night, and how Gacy psychologically toyed with him and terrified him. And it's very eerie. You can definitely feel the fear coming off this guy as he's telling the story, and he tells it very well. Audio of Gacy discussing the difference between hetero, homo, and bisexuality, how he's bisexual, and his methods for how he would bring it up to people. Like if they're like, no, I'm not like that, he'd be like, oh, I'm just kidding, I'm just seeing how you handle pressure. Yeah, how he's bisexual, not homosexual, because he doesn't want to be in a relationship with men. Which, getting his twist on things is one of the more interesting aspects of this entire series. More about the JCs, his role with audio, in audio of his sex act with Donald Voorhees Jr., who was the son of another JC member, and then how that led to his arrest and sodomy charge. We do get highlights of his evaluation on screen, his psych eval, sentenced to 10 years and divorce papers on the same day, audio about that. Then we go back to Illinois, 78, day 3. Surveillance on Gacy is plotted by Lieutenant Joe Kosenczak, worked by Rob Robinson, Bob Schultz, Dave Hackmeister, Mike Albrecht, which I think Mike Albrecht is the only one in that's actually one of the interviewed people. Day 4, audio from Gacy on the surveillance, how he kept trying to lose him. Day 5, the gay community and the relationship with the police, the kind of employees he would hire for PDM. He wouldn't hire experienced older guys. He wanted young high school kids that were inexperienced. He would say it's, that way I could get their foot in the door for when they go off to do something else, which we all know why he really wanted them. And then how a number of his employees would go missing. Mentions John Cizik as a possible victim by the ring that was found in the house, how his car was being driven by Michael Rossi, which was one of Gacy's kind of right-hand guys for PDM, him along with David Cram. Day 6, lawsuits on Gacy's side being made out. Then we jump back in time to Anamosa, Iowa, 1968. Audio of Gacy on the time he was serving. Footage of him singing in the prison choir, being the cook. We get an interview from Ray Cornell, who's a former inmate with Gacy. Audio of Gacy on how his dad died Christmas Day, 68, while in prison. No one told him. How Gacy and Cornell only served 18 months. And Cornell goes into how Gacy was the kind of guy where if you mess with him, he's going to find a way to get you back. That's why he took the cook job. Because if you mess with him, he can put mouse shit in your food. So then we jump back to day 8, Gacy inviting them inside, and Bob Schultz excusing himself to the bathroom, heat kicking on, and this putrid smell coming out. And then him recognizing what it was, interviewing David Cram again. Cram tells him how he was told to dig holes one day, and when he messed up, it was the only time he saw Gacy get mad. Putting the smell together, how they needed the second search warrant, and they did come across a receipt in Gacy's trash can, and being able to match that to the receipt Peast had for a film at the pharmacy. So then day 9, December 20th, my birthday, Sam Amarante on when Gacy came to his office and confessed everything to him after getting drunk. Him and Leroy Stevens, and audio from Gacy on that night and what came from it. So we get an episode 2, which is called A Nicely Kept Secret. Opens up 1976, goes into his victim, Michael Bonin, as told by his sister, Patty Vasquez, what kind of a young boy he was, the effect it had on their family, the toll it took on their dad. When he went missing on June 3rd at the age of 17, and then just the whole aftermath of the family from that. Shows family photos, and then learning when he left, it's because he had gone to work for a guy named John Wayne Gacy. So then day 10, Amarante, the day after Gacy confessed to him, going to tell police, if he leaves, shoot his tires out. Don't let him leave. And then how they followed him, kind of led into a chase. It was snowing very badly. Stuffed pot in some kid's pocket. They pulled him over for it. They arrested him. Then we jump back to June 1970, which Gacy being released from Anamosa, moved to Chicago. He moved into 8213 North Somerdale Avenue. And you get audio of him saying how he wanted to prove to the world that you can have everything, lose everything in the worst way, even having this label and going to prison for what he did, and then getting out and then building yourself back up again. He said that was his whole motivation when he got out of prison. And then photos of the house, the neighborhood, interviews with some of the neighbors about the kind of community that it was in the 70s. We're introduced to Marty Zielinski, who was a photographer and former employee of Gacy, on being around the Gacys a lot and more about the community, and how he came to be Carol Hoff, his to-be second wife, um, which they met and married in 1971. Earlier, I think I said 74, but they married in 71. Audio of Gacy talking about meeting, marrying, and explaining bisexuality to Carol. Photos of their wedding in their role in the community. Then we jump to 1973. His involvement in Democratic politics, starting PDM with photos and audio. They were introduced to Tony Antonucci, who was a former PDM employee when he was 16, how he dug a large hole for a barbecue pit, and then lots of photos of the kinds of barbecues he would have. And he said how the next day it was filled in, and he thought that was weird. May 1978, how he came to meet Rosalind Carter, goes into his clowning as Pogo, and with audio and photos. And it does mention how clowns can get away with anything. Clowns can get away with murder, which is a famous Gacy quote. You get a few interviews from people say how Gacy would brag about how you could do anything as a clown. Sit in women's laps and feel them up. They don't care because you're a clown. And but also how he liked to lose himself in that kind of identity. So then we jump to December 21st, 78, when Gacy was brought back to the station, and they were getting the second search warrant. The night of December 21st, Dan Genty, an evidence tech, after they were granted the second search warrant given to him by Terry Sullivan, how the first place he went was the crawl space, and how the first thing he found was a shoulder bone. And then it goes into the excavation under the house with videos and photos. And when he finally, which it actually says like Cook County evidence video. And the crawl space is very creepy looking, especially when you think there's 26 bodies down there and just the dead of winter. It has some atmosphere to it for being sort of a gritty old evidence tape. And then audio with Gacy saying, well, Greyhound Busboy was number one. So then we jump all the way back to January 3rd, 72, his first victim. Excuse me. Audio of Gacy saying how he met him, stabbed him, buried him in the crawl space. He described it as self-defense. Did engage sexually with another male till 74, 75, because he was kind of spooked of the whole thing. So we jump to 74, the downfall of their marriage, with an old interview clip of Carol Hoff saying how he was leaning more towards men than her or women in general at that point, and audio from Gacy and how he brought back a bunch of young men back to his garage. Carol knew what was going on sexually, but she didn't know everything. And it even made her out to be the kind of woman that she had just been divorced when she met Gacy, so she only kind of knew how to survive if she was married, just needed to be taken care of, I guess. So then Tony Antonucci, the former employee, shares a story of wrestling with Gacy, and when Gacy slapped cuffs on him, and how he got out and slept them on Gacy, and then audio from Gacy on this, which had that ominous quote that a lot of people know, like, not only did you get out of the cuffs, or not only are you the first one to get out of the cuffs, you're the only one to get them on me. So then we go into John Butkovich, who was killed July 31st of 75. He went missing 2 weeks after that, wrestling with Tony Antonucci. He was an employee. They had gotten into a fight about some pay that was owed to Butkovich. Gacy, there's some audio of Gacy going into that. An old televised interview with his mother, Teresia, It goes into the argument about money with audio from Gacy on how he killed him and how he buried him under the garage. Goes into the divorce in '76, audio of him going into the divorce, and now how now he can keep cruising. Now he has all the time he wants to go cruising in Chicago. It goes into the area of Bunkhouse Square, which was kind of where the gay community was. Is where they all hung out. Is where the runaways got dumped off the bus. It's where the male prostitutes worked. Uh, and how that was his area that he patrolled. He would impersonate an officer. It would go into his type. Um, and this really just shows sort of his uh, uh, egomaniacal nature, his lack of remorse, and sadistic side. Because there's audio of him talking about like the rules of prostitution, saying like it's not their body. I bought it. It's mine. I I can do what I want with it. It's like when you buy something at the store. You buy it, you take it home, and you do whatever you want with it. So we get to December 22nd, Gacy Excavation Day 1. And you get more of the Cook County evidence tape of the excavation. And the inside deconstruction of the house, how they had to tear out all the floors so that they could get to the ground a lot easier. And the bodies being dug out. Audio of Gacy talking about keeping the bodies in the crawl space. It goes into the victim profile a bit. His MOs, such as impersonating an officer with his black Oldsmobile and a light, and photos of his extensive badge collection. They were introduced to Larry Finder, who is a prosecutor for Cook County, on how Gacy killed his victims, and it goes into his handcuff trick and his rope trick with audio. Larry Finder goes into how Gacy showed Finder him in person the rope trick with a rosary around his wrist, and that was, that's how he explained his rope trick to Larry Finder. Excavation Day 3, more photos of bodies being laid out as they were found. Michael Bondon's sister on getting the call that he was found, which is obviously around Christmas time. Day 4, news footage of the excavation and all the people standing outside, which even back in the 70s, everyone was very nosy. I mean, I'd probably be there too, but still. And just how it became a media circus. And then John Wayne, it shows like a compilation of all these different news stations all over the country. Like, John Wayne Gacy, John Wayne Gacy, John Wayne Gacy, serial killer John Wayne Gacy. And how by day 4, 15 bodies were found. Day 5, 21 bodies found. Audio of Gacy saying peace is in the water. Because if you think about it, the police are there looking for one person in particular. They're looking for Robert Peace. And after 5 days, they found 21 decomposed bodies, none of which are who they're looking for. And it does go into how, actually, I think that's later. Audio of Gacy saying, he's, I ran out of room. I have this vision of water where the road ends. You just keep driving on the bridge. Just let peace lie in peace in the water. So that's the end of episode 2. So episode 3 is called Sane Enough. News footage and audio of the circus outside his house. News interviews of Rick Johnston's father, who went missing August 6th of 76. Aftermath of victims' families after something like this. Like how a lot of families got divorced after one of the victims would go missing, or fall into some kind of despair. In some cases, maybe even like alcoholism, or just, you know, the levels of despair and just how the families can and did get tore up. I guess a lot of them actually did get divorced and split up. Day 6, which was December 28th, more footage from the crime scene video goes into identifying some of the skeletal bodies and asking for help from the families, uh, which a lot of them families had to bring the dental records so that they could match them up, be like, oh, no, sorry, this is not your son, or yeah, your son's over there. It went into the stigma of being gay in the 1970s, and maybe that's why a lot of parents did come forward. Because, like I said earlier, like, oh, this guy's a sex killer. If we come forward saying, hey, is this our son? Yes. Oh, that means he's gay, and now everyone's going to know. It gets into that a little bit. Maybe that's why a lot of parents didn't come forward then, or even when they initially went missing. March 21st, 1978, it goes into Jeffrey Rignall, who was a gay man that was picked up by Gacy and chloroformed numerous times, tortured, and then let go. It shows a news interview with him, photos of his burnt face from being chloroformed so many times, and how the police didn't look into it because actually male on male sexual assault wasn't really a crime back then, especially if homosexuals were involved. They just took it as, oh, they just had a rough night, now one's mad at the other one. That was basically the extent of it. So it goes into how Rignall took it upon himself to find John Wayne Gacy, and how he, the sort of sleuthing that he did involving remembering his car, waiting by the exit that he recognized. It goes into Frank Landingen, who went missing November 4th, 78, and James Matsara, also November 78, and then Robert Peace, December 11th, 78, his last 3 victims. So December 22nd, the map Gacy drew of the crawl space, and it shows it, and how he had to start using the river. Audio of Gacy's sloppiness when he abducted Peace from the pharmacy. He goes into what the fuck was I thinking? All these people all around me. I just walked in there like an asshole. And goes into and then he goes into details of how he was killed, how he was placed in the attic, and that's where he was when police showed up for the first search warrant. And you really get the sense of how he felt about these bodies because, he says, I was tortured him, phone rang, I came back and he was dead, but I had to go to sleep because I had to get up the next day. And, like when you have stuff on your bed, you got to clear it off so you can lay down and sleep. That's basically what he says. January 1st, 78, news footage, 27 bodies discovered, and there were huge snowstorms that kind of put a lot of things off, especially when it came to the river. Then we jump to April 9th, 79. Peace body is found. Footage of the community when he was found. News footage of the destruction of Gacy's house, which was April 10th. Mentions how many total bodies were found and where. Like, there were 26 in the crawl space, 1 under the foundation of an addition, 1 under the barbecue, another 1 under the garage, and then 4 in the river. Then it goes into the prepping for the trial. Amarante and his family getting death threats for defending Gacy, which that's another thing people aren't that smart about. Everyone has a fair trial. If he didn't have anyone to defend him, the case would have been thrown away and he probably would have been let go. Everyone deserves an attorney, so even if it's going to be a wash, or even if the lawyer knows they're guilty or knows that nothing they can do can help, everyone still deserves, the right to a fair trial and, right to counsel. So it just showed how angry and ignorant people can be. How we got Robert Mata involved as an attorney as well, and then we get an interview with him on how he first met Gacy. Mentions the insanity plea, and then it compares Gacy to John Hinckley, which was actually around the same time, the guy that shot Reagan, and how Gacy did not fit the classic case of the insanity plea. And then comes out that Gacy actually studied, how to get an insanity defense. We get an interview from Richard Rappaport, who was the forensic psychiatrist and expert witness for the defense. He goes into his evaluation of Gacy, which it goes into his childhood, his relationship with his dad, his mom, along with audio from Gacy talking about this. And then we get, his evaluation on the screen with highlights of it in red. Then we get the trial, audio of Gacy about the upcoming trial, and then this is put together by week numbers, like Gacy trial week 1, February 6th, 1980. Shows the media circus of the trial, audio of Gacy, shows some of the family members at the trial, news interviews with some of them. Week 4, which is February 25th, 1980, Gacy's mother testifies. We get Rappaport's insanity defense, mentions how the focus was, this is actually Bonin's sister. She talks about how every day on the news, all the focus was on Gacy. Victims got no attention. Week 6, March 10th, he's found guilty. News interview with some of the parents' reactions and some of the loved ones. March 13th, he's sentenced to death. Audio of Gacy saying thank you to his attorneys, but still having no remorse. Shows clips of his CBS interview from 1992, which was a special called Gacy Talks, which I have seen. And audio of him talking about his appeals. News footage of the parade for Gacy's execution. May 10th, 1994. News footage of all the people outside the prison for his execution. Interview with a journalist who won a raffle to be a witness at the execution. It goes into his final words being "kiss my ass," probably being a myth. It's something that was probably made up in the media for sensationalism, and how that's kind of taken on a life of its own as well. Then the aftermath of his death, how people felt. Then we get an interview from Jason Morin, who's a lieutenant for Cook County, how in 2010 he looked into the 8 unidentified bodies in the case, reopened it. How in 2010, 17, and 21 they identified 3 more people, but there's still 5 left. And the end of the documentary goes into people talking about how, please come forward, or else, there's still Gacy victims, there's still numbers. If you could come forward with help, we can give them a name and a face, and we can let them lay to rest, and stuff like that. And then when all the interviewees talking in such a humanizing way about the victims and how they should be remembered instead of Gacy, we get photos of all 33 of them, or at least 28 of them, the 28 that are identified at this point, with their name and date. And then it ends with the website that you can go to for any information on the last 5 victims, which is cookcountysheriffs.com. And that's the John Wayne Gacy tapes. I'm sorry if these videos are too long. When I do the Bundy tapes, I'm going to have to shorten it because this is a whole other episode. There's 4 episodes in this. But yeah, I did know quite a bit about the Gacy case. I didn't really know the finer details about maybe the investigation or his time in Waterloo, or like his prison, uh, like his time in prison in a Waterloo or stuff like that. But I did know a lot about Gacy going into it. Maybe not as much as Dahmer. So it was still pretty illuminating, still very well made. I'd say this one is more focused than the Dahmer tapes. And then anytime we jump from time frames or we get the audio clips, it feels more natural, more fluid. But the Dahmer tapes is still very good, and I really enjoyed this one. Conversation with the Killer series is probably my favorite serial killer documentary series, and this was probably my second favorite after the Bundy tapes. So I will be doing the Bundy tapes, so stay tuned for that. And I do have other documentaries and movies to get to as well. But I'm going to wrap this up because I know it's going to be long as hell. But anyway, I thank you for watching.